Hey guys, welcome back to my channel where I talk about the NWSL, women's soccer, just soccer, only soccer. I am getting so tired of this. I am so tired of hearing about these abusive coaches in the NWSL. I'm tired of the same story of multiple players coming forward with serious allegations of emotional, verbal, and sexual abuse in the league not doing anything about it. I'm extremely fed up with the NWSL, the owners, and in this case, US Soccer, knowing that players are being abused and basically dismissing it. If multiple players are coming forward saying the same thing about a coach, raising the same concerns, corroborating their teammates' stories, do you not stop to think, wow, these players are saying the same thing about this guy and it's not good? Maybe I should look into it more. Maybe I should investigate it more. Maybe I should take this seriously. Maybe I shouldn't sweep it under the rug so that it doesn't come back to an irritated women's soccer YouTuber years later who's going to bite my butt. That being said, take your blood pressure medicine and let's get into it. Molly Hensley Clancy, bless her heart for covering this, wrote another piece detailing emotional abuse, verbal abuse, and manipulation done by former Chicago Red Stars coach Rory Dames. I'll link the article in the description below, but multiple players multiple former players on the Chicago Red Stars came forward talking about Rory Dames' years of abuse. This goes back to when US Soccer was supporting the NWSL and paying U.S. women's national team players to play in the NWSL. Many players tried to go to U.S. Soccer with their complaints about Dames, only to be ignored and brushed aside. One of these players who went to U.S. Soccer with these allegations was U.S. women's national team star forward Christen Press. Press says, I think Rory emotionally abuses players. He doesn't have a safe distance between himself and his players. He uses his power and status as the coach to manipulate players and get close to them. The article then says, Press is among 7 players who told the Post they believe Dames had been emotionally abusive to them or their teammates, including 5 players who said they sought to be traded or leave the team because of it. Again, that's 7 players coming forward, 5 wanting to leave the team because of the abuse. Another thing to note is a lot of the players spoke up anonymously because they were afraid of damaging their soccer careers. Christen Press says in an interview, things were happening that were inappropriate, but I'd been told to be quiet, that this was fine. What Christen means by that is she spoke up about Rory Dames back in 2014 to Sunil Gulati, the president of U.S. Soccer at the time, along with other U.S. soccer officials. Gulati basically dismissed Christen, saying Dames' behavior was normal for a professional coach. Christen Press was also told that she needed to play in the NWSL if she wanted to keep her spot on the national team. So she returned for another season to the Chicago Red Stars. Honestly, Press was basically threatened. If you don't play in the NWSL, you lose your spot on the national team. How messed up and unfair is that? The article then says, in 2017, Press said she told Dames that she wanted to be traded, a request that she said she made because of Dames' treatment of her. The next year, she filed a formal complaint against him with U.S. Soccer, sparking an investigation. She wanted to protect her teammates, she told U.S. Soccer, according to documents reviewed by the Washington Post. So I commend Christen Press for that. I commend her for looking out and wanting to protect her teammates. Christen Press in the complaint talked about emotional misconduct by Dames. Her former teammates also came forward to U.S. Soccer investigators with similar stories. Former Red Star player Jen Hoy talked about how she witnessed abuse being done to others on the team along with herself. One player who wanted to stay anonymous out of fear of retaliation said she was put in an emotionally abusive dynamic with Dames. She said Dames would text her at all hours, ask her to spend time with him outside of soccer, and retaliating when she tried to pull away from him. Dames would ask her to go to lunch and dinners with him, and she felt like she couldn't say no. And I'm actually going to be going into more detail about that later on. After the investigation by U.S. Soccer, nothing was done about Dames. Am I surprised? No. Is anyone surprised? I mean, I would be surprised if you were surprised. That's the only surprising thing. The article then says the Red Stars majority owner, Arnim Whistler, who had worked with U.S. Soccer to help found the league in 2012, was aware of the 2018 investigation against Dames at the time. Two people with the knowledge of the investigation said, and he was informed by investigators of some of the players' allegations as part of an interview. So we have another owner who knew about the allegations and didn't really do anything about it. The article then goes on to say Bauer Luce said the team had never received any final report on the outcome of the investigation, nor any official recommendations from U.S. Soccer. After the investigation, she said the team had taken steps on its own to address what is understood to be the concerns, including shifting coaching responsibilities and adding regular player surveys. Player surveys? Like, really? I remember Jenna Hellstrom saying that she filled out a survey in regards to former Washington Spirit coach Richie Burke, and no one got back to her on that. Sorry, I thought this would just be a good detail to add because it just sounds so familiar. After the so-called investigation by U.S. Soccer, the players weren't happy, obviously. None of the investigators reached out to them. Christen Press was even afraid that Rory Dames was going to come after her. She says to the Washington Post, "I was terrified of what Rory would do and say if he found out this was something I'd said." She adds, "And then I was made to feel by U.S. Soccer that I was in the wrong. There was nothing to report and that this was acceptable." To that I say, no, Christen, none of this was acceptable. None of what I'm about to talk about next actually is acceptable at all. This is where I'm going to be talking about the actual emotional and verbal abuse by Rory Dames. And you guys can decide if this is acceptable. Players recount one incident at a practice where a player wasn't communicating or talking enough on the field. Something that's, fairly important in soccer. The player said Dames yelled at this player, saying, "If you can't even talk on the field, what kind of mother are you?" And this particular player was a mother of a young child. The player started crying, and because this took place at practice, other Red Stars players heard it and were just as stunned and shocked. It wasn't the fact that he yelled, according to the players, it was how he did it. Personal and public, and painful and humiliating. Sam Johnson, a former Red Stars player, says of the incident, "It's extremely demoralizing and definitely verbally abusive. Is verbal abuse against the rules? I don't know. I just know I wasn't comfortable with him challenging my teammate like that." Another player who witnessed that incident said it was really sexist and that you would never say that to a male player. When it came to Rory Dames, though, players said he would often go for personal attacks. The article says he would mock players' educations and personal lives on the field. He sometimes joked that an Asian player should be smarter than she was playing, two players said. He sometimes joked that an Asian player should be smarter than she was playing, two players said, in a way that they felt made implications about her race, and he frequently commented to religious players about their holidays. Two players remember Dames calling a player from Appalachia trailer trash. Former Red Stars players even held back personal information about themselves out of fear he would use it against them. Yeah, that's what narcissists do. That's what abusers do to their victims. They will use personal information against you to harm you and manipulate you. A former player said to the Post, "I realize that this man would use information he has about me in a way that will harm me and in a way that he can manipulate me. I don't want him to know about the things that matter most to me." Exactly. Someone who's very manipulative, someone who's a narcissist, will use the things that you care about against you as a way to hurt you or manipulate you. So it's understandable why some of these players held back, because they knew that he would do this, and that is just really messed up. However, players like Morgan Gutrat and Danielle Colaprico spoke highly of Dames and praised his toughness, saying it made them better on the field. Gutrat says of Dames after the championship loss to the Washington Spirit that Dames is the glue that's held this team together. He's pushed us, and at the same time, he's made people better. Danielle Colaprico said his treatment left her distraught at times, but she believed Dames's yelling served a purpose, and there was always a reason behind it. She saw it as a positive. Colaprico says, "That's the thing that I have taken away, is that if I'm getting yelled at, there's always going to be a reason. It's just a matter of finding that reason." Look, I get it, and I understand that she's seeing this as a positive, but honestly, I just find this distressing because there's no reason for this guy to be yelling at you in the first place. There's no reason in the world for you to be yelled at. It doesn't matter if you miss a pass, get an own goal, lose the ball, lose track of a player you're marking, or can't get around a defender. In my eyes, you don't deserve to be yelled at for that. You deserve to be treated with respect, and a coach shouldn't be a coach if they can't manage their temper or behave in a way that's professional or respectful. Even though Morgan Gutrat and Danielle Colaprico saw Dames yelling as something to be praised, other players didn't see it that way. Jen Hoy, who was a frequent Dames target, according to the article, considered leaving the team because of Dames' treatment of her. Her now husband encouraged her to leave. Her husband said to her, "You staying says to me that you don't respect yourself, and I know you do." She said her husband helped her to see what she couldn't, and she realized it was time for her to go. Hoy asked for a trade and left the team in 2018. Players also talked about Dames as being power hungry and always wanting to be in control. He liked being in control, and some players were afraid of him. They were worried about him getting rid of them and shipping them somewhere else in retaliation if they defied or raised concerns about his coaching. Another thing to note is Dames handled most of the trading because the Red Stars do not have a general manager. Dames would go out of his way to control his players. Hoy talked about how they had a game in New York and her parents drove 8 hours to watch her play. She asked Dames if she could stay with her parents after the game because it was a long holiday weekend. She ended up playing poorly in the game, and as a punishment, Dames told her that she would be traveling back with the team that night. After returning to Chicago, Dames gave the entire team the weekend off. Players also said that he would withhold time off as a punishment. Dames would go out of his way to control players in other ways. During a preseason trip, Dames told players he was holding one-on-one meetings, but he didn't have a schedule. Instead, they would have to be available and ready within a 5-minute notice. He was probably only giving them a 5-minute notice. 3 players said no one even left the hotel, not even for food. One player said of this incident, "You knew he had power in this situation and he was going to use it." Christen Press said she witnessed Dames exert power and control over players in ways that made her uncomfortable, and it would sometimes push her to intervene. Press says he asserts control like you're a little girl, not an adult woman, when you can go out to a concert, when you can say something or you can't say something, when you can see your family. It felt like it's a disrespect that is related to gender. The article also says players witnessed Dames blurring the line between player and coach in a way that made them and their teammates uncomfortable. And before I go on, the Washington Post had this picture above the next part. If you don't know who that is, that's Rory Dames shaking hands with Paul Riley, ex-Portland Thorns and North Carolina Courage coach, accused of sexual coercion by former players that span over 10 years and across multiple leagues. I covered that too, links below. Anyway, I get why this picture was used, and when I read this part, I felt a chill go up my spine, and I just felt so disgusted. A former Red Stars player described her relationship with Dames on the condition of anonymity out of fear of retaliation. 3 of her former teammates confirmed parts of her story because they witnessed his behavior around her publicly, and it made them concerned and very uncomfortable. Sorry about that, I had to cut the video off. I needed to sneeze. Anyway, this player had arrived to the Chicago Red Stars as a rookie, and Dames took interest in her right away. According to her, it went far beyond soccer. He would invite her out to lunch with 1 or 2 of their teammates, and then he would invite her out to dinner with 1 or 2 of her teammates. He made the lunches and dinners mandatory, and at these meals, Dames would ask her about her personal life and her relationship with her boyfriend. The player said she felt like she didn't have an option to say no. She would often see Dames outside of soccer twice a week or more. Just want to jump in and say Dames knew what he was doing. Like, this is an example of Dames asserting his power and control over her. She's a rookie player, very young, and he's in a position of power. Like, he knows that he thinks that she won't stick up for herself because, like, she's a rookie player and she's young. Like this guy knew what he was doing. Dames often made multiple comments to the player about her appearance that made her uncomfortable. He would text her at all hours, sometimes late into the night, telling her how disappointed he was in her. Sounds like my ex-girlfriend, not gonna lie. And then he would text her asking about what she thought about his lineups. 2 others confirmed the texts and their frequency, according to the article. After a year or two of being on the Red Stars, the player started pushing back and saying no. Rory Dames, ever the weak, pathetic, and power hungry, was upset at losing his control over this young player. He started retaliating against her. After meeting her boyfriend, Dames benched her for one of the team's preseason games. For 2 weeks afterwards, Dames barred her from training with the first team, making her practice with the reserves, a squad below the B team of substitutes. So Dames knew exactly what he was doing by doing this to this player. He was trying to get control back. He even said to her something along the lines of, "I don't think it's a coincidence that you pulled yourself away from me and you're playing worse. We're better when we're connected." Oh, that's disgusting, and I'm cringing just reading that. One of this player's former teammates described it as a power struggle. She said their relationship was awful. It stands out to me how he'd use her personal life, how he'd really integrate it into his way of coaching her. He'd say, "I know your boyfriend doesn't like me. It had nothing to do with soccer. He loved having power over these 20-something-year-old women." Dames would go on to target this younger player with verbal and emotional abuse. He would even single her out to the media without mentioning her name. He said, referring to the player, "That person didn't do their job. It's as simple as that. And if I was Danny," he told a journalist referring to a Red Stars teammate, "I would be pissed off." So trying to turn her teammate against her. Like, so messed up. What is wrong with this guy? Dames also got in her face at a game during halftime. He screamed in her face, "I swear on my daughter's life, if you pass the ball backward or sideways one more effing time, I'm taking you off the field." When she lifted her arms to gesture at him to lower his voice or calm down, he screamed, "Don't you tell me to calm down." Anyway, this player would eventually leave the Red Stars, and in 2018, U.S. soccer investigators reached out to this player regarding Rory Dames. She talked to the investigator for more than 2 hours, telling her story and supporting and corroborating Christen Press and her teammates' stories as well. After that, no one reached out to this player, Christen Press, or the other former Red Stars who came forward regarding Dames' abuse. And I'm going to end this here with the quote at the end of the article. One player said, "It made me think, what happened over the past 3 years? My teammates gave their stories and nothing happened." My teammates gave their stories, told their stories, and nothing happened. Kaya McCullough, Jenna Hellstrom, Shani Pirelli, Mana Shim, Christen Press, Jen Hoy, Sam Johnson, and many former Red Stars who wanted to stay anonymous, the players across other teams who wanted to stay anonymous, they all came forward with stories of abuse to the NWSL and US soccer, and nothing happened. It's so sad that this is happening. Like, what is the point of telling players to report abuse when nothing gets done in the end? What's the point if the abuser keeps their job and doesn't have to face the consequences of their actions? It takes players coming forward to the media. It takes players stepping into the spotlight and talking about the abuse and trauma they suffered just to get the NWSL, and in this case, US Soccer, to do something. The NWSL and US Soccer should have done something about Rory Dames and these other abusive coaches in the first place, instead of sweeping it under the rug and pretending it didn't happen. Anyway, I want to thank Christen Press, Jen Hoy, Sam Johnson, and the former Red Stars players who wanted to stay anonymous. Thank you for coming forward. Thank you for telling your stories. Thank you for bringing this to light. Hopefully this will encourage others who have suffered abuse to come forward with their stories as well. As Nadia Nadim said, this league could be great, but we need to get the idiots out. Not only get the idiots out, but protect the players. Anyway, this is all I have for you guys today or tonight, and I'll see you all in the next one. Later.